Welcome to this Select Technology webinar titled Sharepoint, More Than Just a Document Store. Today your presenter will be Nick Ellis, our Digital Transformation Consultant. I think you're going to love him. My name's Mehta. I'm the Marketing Executive at Select Technology, and I will be Nick's right-hand man and producer and doing all the questions for you. Hopefully we have everybody here today, and I think we're going to hand over to Nick.
The hour is going to be filled with overview, which you can see there marked as general, so accessing SharePoint, multiple sites and what that can mean for a business, team sites versus communication sites, not a lot of difference, but I'll just quickly talk about what they are. Delve is a product that a lot of people haven't heard of, don't use. It's a kind of what would you call it? It's a companion product that goes alongside SharePoint. And then Teams, which most of you will be familiar with. We'll just look at how SharePoint can be integrated with Teams. In terms of specific functionality, you can see they've got lists, forms, planner, events, news, OneNote, project, and then at the end a little bit of a talk about Power Apps. I'm not going to go into Power Apps in great detail today, simply because there's a whole other webinar all about that. So if you're interested in that, we can discuss that another time. But I'll touch on it just in terms of the possibilities at the end here. So this is the SharePoint homepage. We're looking at if you will, a fictional company here, which is a company called Contoso, and it's a demo site that Microsoft allowed us to use. I've configured it here with, you can see, just 3 sites and a bit of a heading page. So what happens when you come to just SharePoint, so if you click here, or if you go in the menu and you go to the SharePoint there, you get taken to this page particularly. Now that gives you, as you can see, the various sites that you're looking at. If you were to go to my version of this in Select Technology, you'd see about 35 sites because of various complicated reasons. But so there's no limit to it. You can have as many as you like. This is accessing it through the web interface. There is a mobile app for SharePoint as well. I actually think it's very good, particularly if you're using lists, or if your company is going to use it for publishing news. The SharePoint site is really good because you get a little mobile notification. Yesterday, Jig wrote a page on our intranet, published it out, and he also sent an email saying to everybody in the business, but actually I knew before I got the email, because the second he hit publish, it went ping on my phone. So the mobile device or the mobile app rather, is a very good way of accessing it. It's not incredibly functional, but if you just need to get information quickly, the mobile is the way, I would say. It is also embedded into Teams in various ways, and we're going to look at that. The other one that a lot of people don't seem to take a lot of advantage of is that it's actually embedded into the file save menu and the file open menu in Word, Excel, PowerPoint, etc. So you can actually save your files directly into SharePoint and open files directly from SharePoint without having to go through any of this. If you're using, and I know we're saying more than just a document store, I'm just going to talk about a document store a little bit. If you are accessing, you don't really need to have a particularly different experience to if you're familiar kind of file save type thing. It doesn't have to be a big sort of cultural shift in the way that some people have been concerned about in the past. It used to be the case a long time ago with SharePoint that you had to save it locally and then drag and drop it in. You don't have to do that anymore. That's all been solved. Anyway, so those are the various ways of accessing it. The other one is OneDrive. So OneDrive, if you're using that now, basically it is SharePoint. It's the same basic technology underneath. And if you were to click keep offline on SharePoint, then it's the OneDrive engine that's doing that, and it will store those locally. Try to avoid doing that because it can cause issues with versioning and data. Yes, so it's integrated in with OneDrive as well. Now, as I said at the start, multiple sites. So at one business, you get your tenant, which is because this is a demo site, it's that bit. Ours is obviously Select Technology and so on. You know, your tenant business, but that can have multiple sites within it, and there's no limit to that. The limit is probably the storage capacity of Microsoft's cloud, and I've never known a business that's hit it. So you can have as many sites as you want, and every time you create a team in Teams, it will create a site in the background. One of the reasons why I've got about 35 in mine. So there's no limit to that, and there's no limit to who can create them. That comes with a slight warning. You can end up with an awful lot of stuff and a bit of confusion if you're not careful. And I'll be honest, we have some things that are in our digital transformation site, which is mine, and some things that are in the marketing site that is Jigs, and we've been this very morning saying that probably belongs there. So you need to be a little bit careful about it, but it is quite useful because each site can have its own set of permissions. That's why you'd have multiple sites. So you can have two identical sites. One is a version available to person A, B, and C. The other one is available to persons C, D, and E. So you can have this kind of overlap, different structures, different setups. So commonly, for example, you might have one site which is the kind of executive leadership one, fairly limited, to the top of the business. You might have another one for an operations team. You might have an all-staff one, and obviously you're going to have different content in different sites. It's quite common to have an intranet for the whole business. Obviously that's available to all staff. The sensitivity of the information that goes in there is quite low. Your executive one might only have 2 or 3 people in it, and the sensitivity of the information can be quite high. I think I've explained that concept to death. A little bit about, you can see here I've created 2 sites, a communication site and a team site. Those are based on the standard templates that come out of SharePoint. So if I go here, I'm going to go create site. First thing it's going to ask me is, do I want it to be a team site or a communication site? Now, fundamentally, there's not a lot of difference between them. The difference is really the template that it's going to apply when you start. So your question is, what am I using this for? Am I using it as it says here? Am I using it to talk to the team, track tasks? Is it a collaboration hub for a few people working on a project? Or is it an intranet where I'm publishing news, I'm communicating, and so on? It will apply some default template, and it will apply some default permissions based on what you choose. Once you've done that, you can actually configure, and there is no functionality available in one that isn't available in the other. It's just about the permissions and template. So have a think about what you're going to be doing with it. If it's an intranet communication, start here. You're going to be closer to that goal from the outset, but this isn't going to prevent you from doing those things, and vice versa. A quick word, if I may, about Delve. You will find Delve over here in the panel, he says. There it is. Anything in this menu, by the way, if you're ever in the Office 365 menu and you find you're repeatedly having to go down here, you can usually, he says, I'm not going to do it now, you can usually pin to the main menu. This is Delve. So what Delve does is it pulls together a lot of information from the business, kind of everything you've got access and permission to. So any documents, you can see here, there's a couple of documents, people, etc., and you can search within that. So simply because I know it's going to find it. I can search for the word Apple and it will bring back those terms and conditions. This is not a very sophisticated view because it's a fictional company, but as it starts to build up, you can also you can share from here, you can have a look and make sure that only the right people can see, you can etc, etc. You can also add things to favorites. You can say I always want to see that. So if I know people who start in Delve and then move out to SharePoint when they need to. And there's also this concept of boards, so you can sort of start to group documents together from various sources. This is going to be looking at every SharePoint site and your OneDrive and every file in somebody else's OneDrive that they have shared with you. It is very permission specific, so if you haven't got permission to it, you won't be able to see it. That has occasionally caused moments of panic. It's always because the permissions are set up wrong. If you can't see it, if you haven't got permission to it, Delve won't let you see it. Now, the other thing you can do with Delve, as you can see here, is you can actually find people. So I can go on me. You can see here it's actually looking at my calendar, again dummy site, so I haven't got anything in my calendar. I've got access to my OneDrive. It's going to tell me some core information and documents from people that work with me, and I can start to build a profile here of things like skills and expertise if you want. That's more suitable, to be honest, to larger businesses. I used to work in a company that had 100,000 people in it. It was useful there because you could find people by skills. In an SME environment where people tend to know each other, it's probably less useful. But if you start looking at other people, so if I go on Nestor Wilk, who is apparently the MD, and I can see, hopefully you can see there's the organizational structure there of who reports to him, who they work with quite regularly, and so on. And then if he had anything in his calendar, I wonder if there is anyone that's got anything in their calendar. Nope. So if he had anything in his calendar, you could just see availability to see when they're. It's just quite a useful little tool. As I say, it's a plugin on the side. Some people start here, some people start in SharePoint. It's all the same information, it's just how you want it presented to you. So I'm going to go into this team site. One thing that I want to say about this site, this structure that you're looking at here, this is not the straightforward template. This actually, what I'm going to do is I will just quickly create another one to show you the straightforward template for a team site. See there, it's going to go next. It's going to ask straight away if I want to add anyone else as an owner. So let's add Jig as an owner to this, and then I'm going to hit finish. Jig will get a notification in his email telling him it's done that. So this is the standard template that you're going to get with really just the activity on site, which is essentially nothing at this stage. A few sort of tips and tricks about how to move forward, but there's nothing really in there. The site that we're going to be working with today is this one, which you can see is slightly different. It's got a bit more to it. This site that we're looking at here did not exist this time yesterday morning, and I'm saying that not to blow my own trumpet so much as to say this is a day's work to get from the complete bare template to something which is, I admit, not the most incredible site ever created, but you can get going, you can do some stuff fairly quickly, and what it has got is all of the bits of functionality that we were going to talk about. What it also has, when you create a team site, that's going to create a Office 365 group. You can see here there's this Nestor Wilk, this fictional director guy, and then there's me, Simon Moore and Jig that are members of this group. Now, if I go into Teams, boom, 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 he says, I'm going to use the web app, and you can see that team site is reflected here. Doesn't do that automatically. If you start in SharePoint, it won't automatically create a team. If I'd started in Teams, it does automatically create the SharePoint sites, so it just depends which way around you do it. But it's really easy to create them and plug them together. It's literally 2 clicks to plug them together. And you'll see here all these channels: general, design, not finance, because that's a secured channel, marketing and recruitment. All those channels, if I come back here to the document site, they are reflected here. Now, that secure channel, just a quick note on that. So that's a channel which has not got everybody in it. So it's limited to a particular group of people. As a result, it doesn't publish all of the files into here. What it does is it creates a little sub-site if you're using secure channels. So if I go open in SharePoint, you'll see it has actually created a whole separate site just for the finance area, just to make sure that the security is reflected in SharePoint in the same way as in Teams. Just good practice, really. However, we're not talking too much about documents here. One area that having said that I do want to talk about with documents is this little bar up here. So we're all familiar with, I'm going to assume we're all familiar with storing documents and with accessing them in and out through SharePoint. And what we tend to do is we use this button, might use this one, maybe that one, and then everything over here tends to get ignored. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop a document in there. Now, out of the box, there are certain bits of functionality that are available immediately. And if I go in the flow section and configure flows, I've got these options of content approval or request sign off. So if I hit save, it's going to take a second to think about that. There will eventually be a request sign off in this drop down, he says. It can take a second to think about, but you can actually create your own flows. You can, as you saw, configure flows. So any kind of automation and workflow that you want to drive from SharePoint, you can do from here. So you can say, okay, this document here, that's why the flow hadn't appeared. Okay, so now I want to say, here's an invoice that I prepared for a customer, and I want to get that approved by my manager. This is a default one by my manager, which in this scenario is that fictional Nestor Wilk guy. I can add comments and approvals, hit run flow. What's going to happen is Nestor is now going to get an email that says, have a look at this file, approve or reject. And then when he does, I'd get a reply back. That's there straight out the box. But you can develop more sophisticated ones if you like. You've got move to, copy to as well, so you can move it around into other sites and what have you. So that's it's a good bit of functionality, particularly for things like marketing. I've designed all this marketing stuff here. Marketing director, is that okay for me to publish to the website or whatever? Or as I say, invoice approvals, or anything that requires a higher level of authority just to confirm it. And you can then also tie that flow into further automation so that when it's approved, rather than it coming back to me and me then doing the manual thing, you could say, okay, this is approved for publication to the website, and then the automation can actually pick the document up and publish it for you, so it's all kind of handled automatically. Now, lists. I've kind of made myself a personal mission to drive away the use of Excel for just storing non-formula lists of data. It happens in every business. We open it, we go, oh, I need to write down a list of the 25 people that are coming to this event. So fine, I'm going to put it in Excel. Okay, why? What are we using Excel for? That has lots of advantages, but it also has some disadvantages. And I'm going to try and persuade you that you want to use lists instead. So got a couple of lists in here. Firstly, there's a very big, this is all dummy data. You can download this list of data from Microsoft if you like. It's all dummy data. but you can see, because there's no calculations involved, it's very easy to just store that here. Now, if we use this was imported, so it started in Excel. All I did was create a table, and then in Excel there's a button that says publish this to SharePoint, and it took 15 seconds, 20 seconds. Now you can see here, you can then get into all sorts of filtering on this data. Obviously there's a slight format issue there because it's not recognizing that as a year number. I could say, well, just show me 2019. And in fact, I could say, well, maybe just show me December 2019. And I can, etc. You can see that's filtered out to the point that there's nothing left at all. And then there are additional filtering options, like so. I can clear there. I can come back with the months, so I wanted to say December and January, and so on. So I can filter these. That hasn't produced any results. It's helpful because I've done that. That's why, because neither December nor January 2018 are in the last 3 months. You can filter in all sorts of ways, and you can see you can pin specific filters if you want to remove them. This data here, this is free text. You can't filter on free text. So just to be clear about that, and it's difficult to filter on, not from here rather, it's difficult to filter on number values. So those we have to filter in a slightly different way. We have to come through here, and then I could say, okay, well, I'm only interested in the channel partners, say, and then, okay, well, I'm only interested in 2018. So you get the idea, and maybe I'm only interested in the high discount. And you can manipulate this data really, really easily. And then when you get to a key point, hit export to Excel. And that query will run and produce that effectively as a sort of report for you. It's just running over here. It's actually exported all the rows, but with all the filtering built in, so which is quite handy as well. So if you do need to take it away from SharePoint, you can, but I would recommend using the list as the kind of the empirical record. It has a few advantages. Firstly, people can be working on multiple records at the same time. You can do that a bit with co-authoring, but it's a bit more sophisticated. You can access it from the SharePoint mobile app, through the web, through Teams, and also crucially, you can then use this as the basis of automation again in the same kind of way that we were just looking at. So a nice one here is you can set a reminder based on date. So there's a column in here that it's found, this column here, which is identified as a date. And then I say, okay, right, well, remind me of that. And it's going to say when relative to the date. When it loads, there you go, get an email reminder, how many days before the reminder, or sorry, how many days before that date do I want the reminder to happen? So that is filtering and automation in lists. These field types can be kind of anything really. If I were to come over here, you can see the types of columns you can store. There's quite a lot, and actually there's more as well, and you can cross-reference. Excuse me 1 second. You can cross-reference between lists as well. So you could say maybe here is a list of events, and here is a list of customers. And then here's a third list, which is these customers are coming to these events. Cross-reference and link them all together, and you can start to build an application out of that. We do precisely that. We have a list of webinars, we have a list of customers, not at the personal level, but at the company level, and then we start to track which companies are coming to which webinars, podcasts, etc. And that's about kind of mashing different bits of data together in a way which I personally think is a bit more intuitive than with Excel. Each list is normally visible down here. You can edit this menu as well, so you can add things in, links to external sites, etc. So I could add a link to anything I want, and just to make that accessible from there. And of course, now if I do that, it's going to load the BBC website for me. Building a little bit on that example with lists, this is my invoice approval, taking that invoice example, making it slightly more sophisticated. So here, the use case that I was thinking of here is an invoice comes in from a supplier. We need to record it. We need to get some approval for it, and then before we can pay that invoice. So again, if I select this one, I've got the set a reminder, but here there's two columns. There's the date that the invoice was issued and the date that it is due. So when I go set a reminder, it's got, okay, well, relative to which date? What are we interested in here? And again, you can see there is this start and approval. Now this start and approval, I'm just going to quickly drop into, because this start and approval is actually slightly more sophisticated. Now, I won't bore you too much with this. There's another whole webinar on the subject of automating based on invoices. But essentially, what happens is, as soon as it's created, gets a bit of information, and then starts an approval. That approval request essentially goes off to the named approver, says, here's an invoice. You can link to it. You can look at the file. You can look at all the data that's been created. If you approve it, and this is what I'm talking about, that you can then start doing a bit more automation. So if you approve it or reject it, it's going to update that record, and it's going to say, well, that has now gone from approved to rejected. The other things that I can do in here is alert me. So what in this scenario, you can have the kind of the finance department, and that's my dog. He always likes to make a small contribution to my webinars. Sorry about that. Shush you. So your finance department log it here and also set themselves as how to get an alert when it changes. It raises the approval request, goes off to the director. The director says, yes, that's approved, which changes the record, and the finance department get an alert that tells them that that's happened. So it's all kind of, this is all relatively out of the box. As I say, I created this in a day. Granted, I've been working with SharePoint for about 15 years, but you get the idea that this is, I haven't created anything that required coding or software development here. One thing I have done is I've used Power Apps to create a form. So by default, the new form is going to have everything in it. And that doesn't always necessarily make sense. The approver comment, for example, it doesn't make sense on a new form. Again, this was this morning, took about 5 minutes. So the new form here looks a bit different to the standard. And that's because I've used Power Apps and I've taken out some of the fields so that it's only the relevant stuff at the point of new. So you can configure. It's all just a much more friendly experience than filling in endless rows of Excel data, in my personal opinion. Now, if we compare that with the unmodified financial records and I hit new, my opinion is that it's just a bit clunkier. It automatically assumes you want everything. You're not going to have that level of control. Whereas by quickly throwing together a form in Power Apps and removing the ones that we don't want, you've got a bit more control. Now, conscious of time, so if you're managing data in your business and you're doing it in Excel spreadsheets and it's not kind of budget calculations, you're not making a lot of use of the formulas, I would say start thinking about using lists. Forms. Forms is another one. So you can embed, I don't know if you're familiar, there's a product called Microsoft Forms, which you can always access from here and go to, he says, Forms. There it is. And forms basically will allow you to create forms, quizzes. It's exactly what it sounds like. I created one yesterday for basically to survey the business on the naming of a new product. You can send them out to customers. They don't require authentication, etc. One thing you can do with them is you can actually embed them into your SharePoint. So I was just thinking, what might be a good thing to do given our working from home scenario? Well, how many hours did you work today? Well, I did 8. It was probably only about 4 productive, and I'm in a rotten mood because my dog keeps interrupting my webinars. You know, there are apps on the our mobile devices for precisely this kind of scenario, and I can just hit submit and it's going to say thanks. And the owner of that form is going to start seeing that information collecting over time. So you can just embed that in there so it's always there. In fact, I'll tell you what I'll do. I will go to the form and you can just quickly see the, where is it? There it is. I'm not the owner of the form, that's why. I'm the admin is the owner of the form. I'm going to come back to that. So the planner is the next thing. Again, we have had other webinars specifically on the subject of planner, and we did a workshop I think a couple of months ago, in the days when people were allowed in buildings together. We did a workshop that was about using planner and to organize your team and organize your day. Again, planner can be embedded in, and this is very easy. It's a 2-click thing. You just go add new plan, and it says you want to create an existing plan or use a new one. Wrong way around. Use an existing plan, create a new one. And in here, you're going to get all of the planner functionality that you'd get elsewhere. So you can add a task, you can view it, assign it, add comments, add. Yeah, nice Dr. Seuss reference, if you like. All the things that you can do in Planner, you can do here. You don't have to go out externally. There is a problem, and I'm slightly conscious in this webinar. There's a lot of clicking around going on, and there is a bit of a problem in Office 365. There's so many things. Oh, I've got forms, I've got Planner, I've got Excel data, I've got this, I've got that. And there's so many things to keep on top of. SharePoint is a really good way of bringing all that together and presenting it as one. Now, you've still got the external Planner view. If I go to Planner, bearing in mind I just said this about forms, so we shall see whether I'm right or not. But if I go to Planner, I should be able to see the same plan. There it is. Just skip through this. Got it. No, don't want to do that. So there is that plan. There's the task I just created, so I can interact with that through SharePoint. The nice thing about being here is I'm in SharePoint. I can quickly, oh, hang on, I've got a task to do with my financial records. Let me go and have a quick look at that. Yeah, fine. Now I can go back to Planner, and I'm all in one environment. And I go, yeah, fine, I've done that one now. So it's a very, I think, just brings it all together, gives it a nicer overall experience. Events is another section. I'm very aware there's a lot of information coming at you, so this is not intended as a training course. Of course, this is to give you a sense of the possible. You can see here we've got this event next week. We're talking about Windows 10, SharePoint and OneDrive, and then these events, if I click through into them, there's a bit more information about what they are, who's going to be involved, and so on. So these are not linked into anybody's calendar, but there is an add to my calendar button. So you possibly see there. I know not everybody's seeing the outer edges of this screen for some reason, but you might be able to see that that's just downloaded a calendar file, an ICS file. So if I click on that, it's going to open in Outlook. It's going to do it on another screen, so I'll pass on it. But that would then allow me to save that into my calendar. It's not fully integrated into anyone's calendar because you don't necessarily want everything that's in there. You can set time zones. This one is because of this fictional company, we're in America, but you can set time zones and all that sort of stuff, custom images. So if you've got multiple events within your business, or I would say there may be external. So if you're like doing marketing events, you can see here, we're using them for these webinars. If you're doing kind of public events, but you want an internal planning team and you just want to have a central record of exactly when things are happening, the event schedule here is very useful. Up above, you can see here the records of people. That's all tied into Outlook and all that information, so I can pull all the information, and because we're tied into LinkedIn, it's going to show a bit more information from there if it can find it. Probably won't find it because I haven't signed in, but that can be really powerful. You can start going, oh, okay, that's actually that person that I was talking to. All the power of LinkedIn, and any files that you shared with that individual, what have you. So what I've done here is just quickly mounted up a little panel of the various members of the team, just to make it really quick and easy to just find people. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to build a page very similar to this now. So I'm going to go new page. You see you get various little formats. But I'll use a blank page. Got to give it a name, so maybe I'm going to call it that. I'm slightly inspired by a page we wrote internally yesterday, and I can write some text. I can start to build different formats as well. So I could say, okay, well, 3 columns. So maybe in this section we're going to say Department 1, and then in this column some text, and Department 2, and then over here maybe this is going to be the query section. So then there's a section called people. You can see all I'm doing here is it's like Lego. All I'm doing is just pulling together information and presenting it in the right way. So yeah, and it's really quick to pull that together. Department 2, I might want to be an image. So the image is interesting. That will then let you search anywhere. So you can obviously do a web search. It's a Bing web search, so I know some people have opinions about that, but you can just select an image off the web, chuck it in there, and then queries. Got to maybe add a form for people to raise their questions. So you can see you're building a web page, but it is like Lego. It'll be a long answer. And there's your form. I mean, obviously you could probably not a terribly useful form, but it is a form. I'll come back to my new page, collect responses, and I can choose to show the results on here as well if I want to, but I'll go with just collecting responses. You see straight away it's just logged that together, and then you can just keep building and building, adding in more and more sections. They don't have to be consistent in terms of layout. As you can see, you can embed other things. This is how the planner, that's just pulled from, get me an existing plan and show it in, show me the chart view for it. There it is, done. So all of this stuff that's in Office 365, All I have to do is hit publish. All of this stuff that's in Office 365 is going to be available to you. You can pull it together, you can put document stores in there, you can mount specific documents with a viewer, etc, etc. And also you'll see here, once I've done it, and we do this quite commonly here, is I can then start to email whoever I want to promote the page. Now, a common use case of that, there's at least 2 people registered on this call that are people that I've done this with, where I go and see a customer, I come back to the office as it then was, and a lot of the people in Select are kind of office-based fixed roles. They don't get a lot of face-to-face time with customers. So I write a blog page that says, right, I've been to see customer X, we talked about X, Y, Z, this is what they're interested in, this is what's probably going to happen next. Publish it on SharePoint, hit that email button, we've got a staff group, send it to the staff, it goes to everybody, and everybody very quickly gets a summary of the information. So that is, I think, is a really powerful use. It's had a lot of great feedback since we started doing it, because it informs people, but it doesn't take a lot of effort. And again, with the SharePoint app, you can, and I have on occasion, just sat in the car and just gone, it takes me 10 minutes, go, and it's published. And then you've got various promote options here. So you can either add it into the navigation over here, post it as news, email it out to everybody, and you, as you say, you can see it there. You can save it as a page template as well. News. So news takes us on to the news posts. Now, as you can see, it's the same basic thing. So if you're developing a page or developing a news post, it's exactly the same. So I'm not going to go through it in detail. What news does is, if I were to come back here, I can edit this home page. So I'll tell you what we'll do is we will put the news here, republish that, and because I identified that page as being news, it's going to preload it in there. It's also, if I come back to the SharePoint header, it's taking a second to click through, but on the SharePoint header page, it will give you an aggregate of all the news articles that have been published across all the sites that you're following. So again, really just a very handy way. And then because it's news as well, rather than a content page, it also has comments, so you can have conversations. So this is another thing. I come back, I write my blog, people then comment and go, oh, have you thought about, maybe it's this, you know, or suggestions or whatever it might be. Gets that conversation going without everybody having to be in the same place, without it becoming a clunky email thread that you have to try and work out who said what and when. It's all just kind of built into there. Right. This takes me to the last point on here, which is OneNote. OneNote is completely embedded. So when you create the site, it creates a group that creates a OneNote. This is not automatic. I had to create these sections. If you're familiar with OneNote, it's a really good tool for just doing what it says, really. You take notes, stores it all up in the cloud, again, available mobile, available through the web interface. You can embed it into Teams as well. So very, very powerful tool. Gets spun up automatically when you create any site. Now, the one other area I wanted to talk about on this, we talked a bit about Planner, and I'd love to talk to any of you about how to use Planner for managing your processes, managing your efficiency. Talked a bit about Planner. There is also Project, which is, if you're familiar with Project in the old days, used to be a desktop application, felt a bit like Excel, a bit clunky, what have you. That has all been upgraded. So that desktop application still exists for the really detailed stuff, but you now have these project hubs, which are in fact all built on SharePoint. So if you're familiar with SharePoint, this starts to get quite familiar quite easily. So the CRM replacement app for Willy Wonka's Chocolate Factory here. You can build timelines. This is an extra license, I should say, so it's not straight out of the box, but you can build these really easily. You can. I'm going to move that one earlier. I'm going to move it later. I'm going to create dependencies between things for more advanced project management than you can do in Planner. And I've had at least one conversation recently where people have said, "Oh, can I copy that and use that as a template?" Maybe, but project is perhaps a slightly better way to go. The other big advantage with project you might have seen is this one here, which is a roadmap. So this is a project, this is a roadmap. So I've actually built it out in here, so you can start to see, well, here I've got specific tasks in multiple projects, all for the same customer. Again, I think event management is obviously useful for us when we're doing our infrastructure deployments, software deployments, that kind of thing. Very closely tied in with SharePoint, but it is an extra license. So I just want to clarify that point. But it's worth considering if you have a lot of projects, particularly if you've got very, very key metrics that you need out of those projects, or if you have a lot of projects that are the same over and over again. This is probably a better tool than the planner that we talked about earlier. Now, I have cracked through a lot of information. I'm aware it's now 10 to 12 and people are still here, which is congratulations to you. So just quickly recapping: access, web, mobile, through Teams, principally. Integrated through with OneDrive and also with the Office applications through the menu. Talks about having multiple sites. Delve, definitely go and have a look at Delve. It's awesome. Once it's populated and it's got real world data in it, I find it's a really powerful tool. And the features we talked about: lists. If you're using Excel, stop using Excel, use SharePoint lists. All of that automation that you can drive from there. You can drive automation from the document store as well. Literally, we scraped, it's like running a cheese slice over it. We scraped a very, very thin layer of what's possible there. You can connect that into anything you want. We built one recently internally that was create a list where somebody suggests something that could be tweeted. It had an approval cycle in it. It went off. It was approved by the marketing people. It was approved by a company director. Automatically then connected to Twitter, published the tweet out, responded to things. You can do all kinds of stuff with that. Forms, if you've got structured data, you don't get too complicated with forms, 5, 6, 7 questions at most. But if you've got some fairly simple, structured, repetitive information that you want to gather over time, you can embed that in. Planner, we've talked about to death. Events, really useful for just making sure that everybody understands key dates in your project timelines, and then publishing news for like intranet type format to make sure that everybody's up to date. All of that embedded all in one place to go that does everything, where historically probably a lot of business, and I think probably currently, to be fair, a lot of businesses, right, I've got my Excel, which is my lists of data. I've got my email to everybody in the team, which is how I do my news communications. I've got another Excel, which is how I'm planning people's tasks. My events are in Outlook, but it's all held separately. Excuse me. I think I've rammed that point home far enough, really. So on that note, that's pretty much everything I have to say. I don't know if we've got any questions other than Deb's blurry screen. Have we got any other questions?
Yes, we've got a couple of questions.
Good.
I'll be reading verbatim for you. Does SharePoint work as a document store properly? There was talk that the organisations were rolling back to traditional document stores over using SharePoint. What's your thoughts?
That's interesting. Does it work as a document store? I mean, that's the other webinar, because they're not the document store stuff. I mean, yes, I would say it does. I'd be interested to understand why organisations would be rolling back. I mean, if you're rolling,
I would have thought that everybody's going forward towards cloud storage.
Indeed. So I think I personally have never encountered any problems with it. There are probably the only thing I can think of that can be challenging is if you've got multiple spreadsheets and they're all cross-referencing each other, that can sometimes break because you're dependent on the quality of the link. Because if you've got a spreadsheet that you're looking at on your desktop, which is linked to another spreadsheet which is held in SharePoint, you've got multiple hops across the internet to maintain that rather than it all being in one server. But I would say if you've got your documents in SharePoint rather than the sort of old, I was going to say old-fashioned, but the traditional file server, what you've got is much higher availability. You've got access to all of the automation functionality, which that just doesn't exist in the file and print world, and you've got no capital outlay for the physical infrastructure on site required to support the traditional file servers. So I don't know who asked that question. I'd be very interested to follow up to understand the people that you're talking to that you think are rolling back. And what's driving them to do that, because I personally have not seen a good enough business case to make me want to do that.
No, the only thing I have with SharePoint is because I upload a lot of images to, say, Twitter or Facebook or whatnot, that I end up, if I save it to SharePoint, I've got to download it from SharePoint, then re-upload it, and that is my only bugbear. But I know that I can start to use OneDrive as an alternative place. But when you want OneDrive is an individual thing, really, isn't it? Or am I wrong?
Yeah, OneDrive is your individual file store.
Exactly.
It is fundamentally SharePoint underneath it. So again, you can do some automation and what have you with that. And in fact, you could use, so you can synchronize files. If I go to if I go back into SharePoint a second, SharePoint team site, if I go to the documents section, I didn't touch on it because I'm always slightly cautious about it, but you can sync that down. If you do that sync, what it will do is basically the same as OneDrive. It will appear as a local drive on your server. The problem with it, and the reason why I tend to hesitate with this, is because if you've got multiple people that are all syncing and working offline, you can get conflicts when people come back online, and you can sometimes have issues with versioning. Data gets lost if you've got multiple people working on it. But yes, you can do that.
Yeah, okay, that's cool. Next question is, in your opinion, is SharePoint better than Teams at bringing the tools together? To me, this is not me. Yes. To me, Teams is far easier than SharePoint.
That's a very interesting point. I would say what would I say? Let me think that through. I mean, I don't think that it's an either or. I think is probably what I would say. I think there are elements of this which make sense to do in Teams. There are elements that make sense to do in SharePoint. And the key thing to remember is that Teams is essentially just a client. Teams doesn't do very much on its own. What it does is it accesses all of this in SharePoint to make that functionality available through Teams. But it's still SharePoint that you're looking at. So you need to make sure that you get your SharePoint structures right and your automation and your permissions and what have you, because Teams is really just inheriting that. So I'd say it's not an either or. It's two different approaches to the same basic thing, and if you've got one, you've got the other. You can't have one without the other, really. I've realised, by the way, I just changed screens and highlighted something, and my screen isn't being shared. So I'll just describe that in the documents folder in that bar at the top. The fourth button along, if you haven't got any documents selected, is sync. But don't. But that's where it is.
Yeah.
So I think I understand that. I think it depends how you want to access things. If you're for co-working and collaboration and what have you, definitely Teams is the stronger part, because that's built around all the video calling. We're using Teams to do this presentation, right? But there are some limitations on it. There are times when it's better to be using the Teams site, and I certainly would use the Teams site to configure and build all the stuff. If you then access it through Teams, that's there's a good argument for that, because then you can have chats and whatever.
I think it's because this person is using the Teams app, and that's probably their thinking of they're using the Teams app, and that's why it's easier for them. The Teams,
if you mean mobile app, yeah, you're going to struggle with some of the things like some of the pages. It's not going to do the news stuff. It's not going to do the events stuff. Yeah. You're going to struggle even with the list stuff, to be honest. So yeah, the mobile app is quite limited. If you mean the desktop app, then I think it's an either or.
Yeah. Okay, we've got a couple more questions. All right, I think it's more the same. Is SharePoint a safe environment? How to track sensitive data? Can I breaches, or at least track what is happening?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one. So I didn't really touch on that. So my answer is inevitably is yes, it is safe. You can, it's all tied into the Office 365 authentication and security model, so you can get very granular about who has permissions to what areas and so on. In terms of the sensitivity, it has, I didn't get into it here mainly because it applies to documents more than anything, but it can apply to lists as well. You can tag things with specific sensitivity, so that for example, if you tag things as very highly secure, they're not shareable outside the organization, or they're not shareable to people that aren't already members of the team, that kind of thing. You can control, so even the things that are shareable outside the organization, you can say, I'll share it with you, but only in read only, and you can't download it. You can only look at it in the browser and not even save your own copy. So there's a lot of things you can do with that in terms of sensitivity. And then if you tie it together with with the content controls available in most firewall systems, it takes a bit of configuration to get here, but you can essentially say this is sensitive data. So even if somebody tries to send it outside of your network, the firewall and other things will block it, because you can, although this is cloud, you can contain it within your own network as well. So I would say yes, it is very secure. It drives the most of the British government file storage. The United States Department of Defense file storage is SharePoint driven, among other things. They have other tools as well, of course, but a lot of that is. And I quite commonly, my question would be, what's the security requirement that you have that the United States Department of Defense didn't think? Because I mean, they're only human. They do have situations that they didn't think of, but I would say for 99+% of cases, yes, it's very secure, it's very controllable and very configurable.
To be fair, only 5 minutes before this webinar we were talking about permissions.
We were indeed. And within a list, in fact, you can get down to row level. So even if you, to use that example of invoices, you might have one list of all the invoices that the director might approve, but you might, for whatever reason, want different finance departments not to be able to see each other's entries on that list. You can do that. You can get right down to the granular individual rows. You can see the row you created and nothing else. So yes, you can be very sophisticated with it.
Oh, there we go. Let's see if anybody else asks any more questions. Is it safer than a traditional document store? I'd say yes, we've got that.
Well, I mean, it's, you have to be safer. It is as safe as, it is more resilient than. I mean, if you take a traditional document store and you put it in a safe and you put a bodyguard outside it and all those kind of everything, I'm not going to say it's absolutely 100% secure, because as soon as you say that, somebody will find a way around it. But it meets the global industry standards. It meets the requirements of most national governments. And it brings with it a lot of additional benefits that you can't do in a file store. So you can't have alerts, you can't have any kind of automation, you can't have automatic modification, lists, news, events, all that stuff just doesn't exist in a conventional file store. So I would say it is as safe as. Safer is a slightly subjective thing, so I don't want to sign up to that. But as safe as, yeah.
Okay, and a final question. Oh, okay, maybe people are loving.
Great, good.
Does e-discovery work in SharePoint as well?
Yes. I mean, e-discovery is a discipline rather than a specific product, and there are different products that do it. So I don't want to sort of certify every possible combination, but certainly there are e-discovery tools that will work with SharePoint. Yes.
And that was the last question.
Hooray!
Unless somebody else wants to come in.
Well, I say hooray if there's more. I'm delighted.
No, they're a few thank yous, so we're okay. No more questions.
Okay.
No, well, thank you, Nick. That was excellent. Actually, really, really informative. I know I've learned a few bits from it, and hopefully we'll be able to get around to actually implementing them. So I think we'll call this webinar to a halt. So thank you for joining us. You can contact myself or Nick. You've got our details on the screen at the moment.